I'm an old man now. I'm 65, so I've been around for a long time. Had no interest in the past at all. I was the East Africa correspondent for The Economist in the early 1980s. I was based in Nairobi in Kenya. My beat as their correspondent took me frequently to Ethiopia, which was very much in the news in those days. And in Ethiopia, I came across an incredible story. Ethiopia claims to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, as in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which in the early 1980s, as it happened, I had just seen. So I found myself in front of this monk in a city called Aksum in northern Ethiopia, then in the midst of a war zone. And he's telling me that behind him in this chapel is the Ark of the Covenant. And part of me is thinking, come on. And part of me is thinking, there's a story here. And I started to follow that story. I was told by academics there was nothing to it, but at the same time I could see that this idea that the Ark of the Covenant was in Ethiopia was central to Ethiopian culture, was central to the ancient form of Christianity practiced in Ethiopia, and was central to the religion of the Ethiopian Jews as well, the people who call themselves Beta Israel, or the House of Israel, who practice a very Old Testament form of Judaism. So I started to think, the academics are telling me there's nothing to this, but I think there is something to it. The truth on the ground is much different from what the scholars are saying. And I began to investigate it very, very closely. And that investigation drew me in two directions. It drew me into the ancient past and the mysteries of the past. And it made me realize that everything scholars say is not necessarily true, that they are often expressing their prejudices rather than really researched work. So it was that was my initiation into the past. It was a process. To write that book, I also needed to travel to Egypt, and I found myself in front of the Great Pyramid for the first time. And that eventually led on to my best-known book, which is Fingerprints of the Gods, that was published in 1995. By that time, I was fully drawn in to the mystery and magic of the past and completely separated from current affairs. And I've continued that relationship with the past. I think that's where we need to disentangle the truth most urgently, because if we've got our past wrong, then that's part of why we've got our present wrong as well. Well, how did communities and civilizations begin to form is a question that takes us back to the roots of human experience. Humans are naturally social animals. We live in groups. None of us really have the resources as individuals to function and survive in the world. We have those resources as a community. And I think you can trace the human story as far back as you can possibly trace it, and you're going to find that community is part of it. And for a very long time, those communities were communities of hunter-gatherers. And it's interesting, if you go back to the Upper Paleolithic, that we find almost no evidence for warfare. We find almost no evidence for the greedy acquisition of material goods, rather a living in harmony with nature and a living off the land, but living as a community, small communities which are self-sufficient, which interrelate with other communities, but which do not make war upon them. There's no sign of that. Something else enters the human story in the period that academics call the Neolithic, when we get supposedly, and I think this whole history needs to be looked at very, very carefully, but when we get supposedly the first agricultural communities that are, unlike hunter-gatherer communities, these agricultural communities are generating surpluses. Those surpluses allow specialist skills to emerge. Astronomers, priests, architects, designers can suddenly be supported by the community and can exercise their skills in the benefit of the community. That sounds like a really good thing, but it's unfortunately in the Neolithic, exactly when that begins to happen, that we get the evidence for warfare, for one community seeking to dominate and control another. And I think what a long look at the past says is that is not inevitable to the human condition. We don't have to go that way. We can live in organized societies. We can benefit from large communities pooling their intelligence and their skills. We can benefit from all of that without becoming destructive and murderous. It's a matter of waking up and making the choice. Why did communities create temples? The temple is something that is associated with organized hierarchical religion. You do not get temples in hunter-gatherer societies. In a sense, their temple is the universe. Their temple is the sacred Mother Earth and the sacred Father Sky. Those are the temples of hunter-gatherer communities. They don't need to build structures to perhaps amplify experience. They are already connected to the fundamental basis of all experience. What you get as societies become more organized and more hierarchical is you get the spiritual experience being channeled through some kind of religious structure. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at ancient Egypt, really, which is a culture that actually enshrines many of the values of hunter-gatherer societies much more than many academics would realize, it was also a hierarchical and organized society. They understood something about sky and ground, about as above, so below. They understood how to create sacred spaces in which the human experience of mystery and of the divine could be amplified. And these sacred spaces include the great temples of Upper Egypt, the Temple of Horus at Edfu, for example, the Temple of Seti I at Abydos in Upper Egypt. These are amazing places. The moment that you enter them, you can feel that something's working on your consciousness. Even today, thousands of years after they were decommissioned, after they ceased to be part of a functioning society, they still reach out to us and touch us at an extremely deep level. The Great Pyramid is the classic example of that. The lie told by archaeologists is that the Great Pyramid was the tomb of some megalomaniac pharaoh. It's been clear to me for a very long time that the Great Pyramid was never a tomb. The Great Pyramid was a giant instrument for amplifying human consciousness. And it functions as a beacon. It still functions as a beacon. It draws people towards it from all over the world. They don't even know why they're drawn towards it. It selects its own initiates. For some people, it's just a heap of stones. For others, it's a sacred mystery. And those are the ones that the Great Pyramid speaks to, and it was designed to do that. So, although the creation of temples and sacred architecture is the work of organized hierarchical societies, we have the example particularly of ancient Egypt, which tells us that that work can be good. It can touch the human soul in a wonderful, thought out, beautiful way. It's not an accident. The historian Herodotus visited Egypt in the 4th or 5th century before Christ, and Herodotus reported that the Egyptians were the happiest people that he had ever encountered anywhere on earth. And this is a civilization that devoted its best minds for 3,000 years to considering the mystery of life and death and the mystery of existence, and found a beautiful way to function in the world. Unfortunately, as time goes on, you get a new force coming into the world, and those are the monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which rapidly cease to be about direct spiritual contact. Those sacred temples of Egypt were not about enhancing the power of the priesthood. They were about giving individuals the additional support to access mystery. What we have in the big monotheistic faiths is something very different. We have the priests and the rabbis and the mullahs who are imposing themselves between us and the divine. We are to only experience the divine with their permission, their way, through their system, and no other way. And this then ceases to be something that serves the human spirit, and it becomes something that's part of the system of control in our society. So what I observe is that sacred spaces and temples have become denaturized as time has gone on. They've become a home of bureaucracy rather than a home of spiritual experience. How do I think the pyramids were built? To be honest, I have no answer to that question. And anybody who tells you that he or she knows how the pyramids were built are not telling the truth, because we don't know. We don't know. The Great Pyramid contains a number of mysteries. The Great Pyramid, first of all, is very big. The Great Pyramid weighs 6 million tons. We can calculate that from its mass. It weighs 6 million tons. Its footprint is 13 acres. It's more than 750 feet along each side. It's 481 feet tall. More than 2.5 million individual blocks of stone were used in its construction. But it's not just big, it's really, really precise. The Great Pyramid is locked in to the cardinal dimensions of our planet. The Great Pyramid is targeted on true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. Now, no modern builder would create a large building and add onto his or her shoulders the additional burden of aligning it to true north within a fraction of a single degree. They just wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand why it was important to do that. But something drove the builders of the Great Pyramid to go to a very great additional trouble, not only to create this massive, imposing monument, but also to lock it on to true north. And then other things, to incorporate into its dimensions the dimensions of our planet. I don't want to get too numerical or possibly even boring here, but if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid accurately and multiply that measurement by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. In other words, for thousands of years, through times, through dark ages, when human beings didn't even know they lived on a planet, never mind its dimensions, that monument has encoded and speaks out the dimensions of our planet on a scale of 1 to 43,200. And the scale is not random. The number 43,200 is derived from a key motion of the Earth, which is called the precession of the Earth's axis. The Earth wobbles on its axis very slowly at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 43,200 is a multiple of 72. In fact, I think it's 600 times 72, but I need to double check that. But it's a multiple of 72. Check it out. So they've given us the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by the planet itself. And that's an incredibly clever thing to do. How on earth did they do it? Where did that knowledge come from? This is why I'm forced to consider the possibility of a lost civilization in the human story. This is a work of almost, but not quite, space-age precision. It contains errors, but they are human errors for sure, but they're very tiny. The great precision, great skill, great craft. Some people will say to you, oh, the Great Pyramid was built by slaves. That is utter bullshit. No slaves were ever involved in the construction of the Great Pyramid. As far as I know, there were no slaves in Old Kingdom Egypt whatsoever. The Great Pyramid, I've climbed it 5 times. I've been in every known chamber in the Great Pyramid. It is a work of stunning artistic achievement. You're looking at the work of masters of architecture at the peak of their skill. Not an unwilling labor force, but people who gave their labor to that work with love and with care and with attention. There are blocks of stone weighing 70 tons that have been raised more than 300 feet above the ground. And we're not talking a couple of blocks, we're talking dozens of blocks of that weight. The average block weighs about 2.5 tons. It's the moving of those huge blocks of stone, their arrangement into a high precision monument, and the achievement of actually doing it, because you know, if you make a small mistake at the base, by the time you get to the summit of your 481 foot high pyramid, you don't have a pyramid, you have a corkscrew. Yeah. They got it all right, and nobody today can explain how they did it, with the knowledge that is supposed to have been available in ancient Egypt, in the Old Kingdom, and with the tools that are supposed to have been available. And that's why I can't help feeling that we are missing some chapter from the human story. Do I think music is a global impulse? Absolutely yes. Music is fundamental to the human creature. We are connected to music, through music, with music, in extraordinary and deep ways. It is not an accident, for example, that music, the songs that are called Icaros, are used in ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon. They're not a sideline. The singing of those songs is central to the ayahuasca ceremony and to the ayahuasca experience. And when you're in the grip of the brew, in a deep visionary state, those songs become roads. They become pathways. They materialize. You can see them, and you find yourself following them. They're leading you in the direction of the experience you need. And they're a central part of it. I think music alone is capable of bringing about altered states of consciousness if we engage with it properly. Capable of touching us in our emotional centers in the way that almost nothing else is. I think music is a sacred exercise for humanity, and perhaps we need to recover that notion a little bit and to sacralize music again. I don't really know of any ancient civilization which achieved a high level of functioning which didn't use psychedelics. Psychedelics were astonishingly widely used in the ancient world, and used very carefully, with great attention being played to what we now call set and setting. So, for example, you can go to Chavin de Huantar, about 200 miles north of Lima, turn right, drive up into the Andes, 14,000 feet, drop down into the Chavin Valley, and you'll find yourself in an ancient archaeological site, the largest part of which are galleries below the ground, which were used in ceremony in ancient times, and that ceremony involved the San Pedro cactus. It involved, in which mescaline is the active ingredient. When the conquistadors came there, they couldn't understand what all this was about. Why had they created these great galleries? What was going on? We now know what was going on. They were creating a setting that would maximize the effect of the psychedelic of choice, which in their case was the San Pedro cactus. If you go to Eleusis in ancient Greece, it's a ruin now outside of Athens. But for more than 2,000 years, until the 4th century after Christ, Eleusis was the beating heart of the ancient Greek world. And again, like Chavin de Huantar, it turns out that there are enormous underground galleries, darkened spaces, which they called the telestrion. We now know what was going on there. The initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries came and drank a brew before they went down into the telestrion. That brew essentially was LSD. It was a non-poisonous form of ergot growing on barley, which they then harvested and cooked up in the brew called the kykeon. So no wonder when people went down into the telestrion, into those darkened spaces which were subtly lit here and there, that they would have life-transforming experiences. Plato was an initiate, Sophocles was an initiate, Cicero was an initiate, Pindar was an initiate. They all said that the experience they had had in the telestrion after drinking the brew was life-changing. They lost utterly their fear of death. They knew that death was not the end, but just the beginning of the next great adventure. And those spaces were the heart of everything that was good and worthy and worthwhile about ancient Greek culture. And it's a comment upon the way that civilization has gone, that it was fanatical early Christianity that destroyed Eleusis and that put an end to those rites that had been so life-affirming and so life-enhancing for so long. And this is true, frankly, all around the world, whether you go to ancient India, whether you go to ancient Mexico, of course to ancient South America. In South America, we have a whole pyramid city called Caral, which has only been excavated in the last 15 years. And you know, archaeologists went to it with their prejudices. Nobody could have created a huge place like this unless they were highly domineering and hierarchical and making war on others. Turns out there's no evidence of warfare whatsoever at Caral, but what there is evidence of is the massive use of hallucinogenic snuffs from the Amazon. So this great culture that built the largest pyramids ever created in the New World, pyramids that are 5,000 years old, this great culture was founded upon and based upon the import of hallucinogenic snuffs from the Amazon and the free interrelation of peoples without any warfare. You can find this all around the world. Psychedelics have been central to human culture from the very beginning, and I think that goes right back to the Stone Age, to the Upper Paleolithic. There's a moment when a light seems to go on in our ancestors' heads all around the world, and they start producing art that is definitive of visionary experiences. They are depicting visionary experiences. And that's the moment that we get this huge step forward in the evolution of human behavior. We're already anatomically modern, but the software wasn't there. It looks like it was psychedelics that provided the software, that brought about modern human consciousness. We are now in a process of reversion from that. We need to correct that course. We need to return to the course of expanded consciousness, of dissolved boundaries, of openness to the universe, and to the spirit of love and nurture, which is fundamental to the human experience.